West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
This has been around. That's the broad assessment. And then there are the more detailed specific examples when you get into policing and infiltration, like 2 Florida officers found to belong to the KKK, ousted over that in 2014. Or 2 high-ranking police officers found to be in the white supremacist group Southern Independence, fired from an Alabama police force. Just consider the horror of a KKK member walking around with a badge and gun. Many minority members of the military, that other piece that I mentioned from January 6th, they say they've seen specific examples of white nationalism there. Almost half of the population of minority members, according to a Military Times poll, and 1 out of 5 white soldiers say they've seen that white nationalism right there in our military. Now, some in government have tried to act on this. House Democrats held hearings on this as recently as last year, where a former neo-Nazi recounted on record how exactly they infiltrated the police.
White supremacist leaders encourage their followers to join the police force as a means to cause harm to people of color. It becomes a goal of theirs is to get around the screening process of police departments. That is talked about in the rooms all the time to make sure that they don't see that we have either neo-Nazi past or neo-Nazi beliefs.
Chilling. What's being detailed there, again, in the context of a growing white supremacist murderous threat that 3 different FBI directors outlined, is the elaborate plotting by some to try to get inside police forces, which of course have plenty of problems even before you get to this particular issue, in order for the explicit goal of, quote, harming people of color. And that's not all. I want you tonight to also consider the direct and eyewitness experience of people who served on the Capitol Hill police force. Sharon Blackman-Malley is a 25-year veteran of the Capitol Police Force. She saw so much racism that she was moved to risk her whole career, none of this stuff is easy, to take on the force itself, the force she served on. And she took it to court with a discrimination suit that first began decades ago. Now, it turns out she was not alone. These kind of cases legally are stronger with more numbers or more witnesses. Now, lawyers knew she'd fare better if she wasn't alone, if she could get 10 or 15 or 20 others to join her. How many did she get in this case? 250. Now, she's speaking out now after January 6th, arguing that some of the seeds of that riot and the response and the problems came from the past records of police leaders and powerful people ignoring what she says she documented. I want you to hear her plaintive warning as someone who wore the Capitol Police uniform about what she felt she would be asked to do were she serving on a day like January 6th.
She's spoken to black police officers that were at the Capitol that day. They're traumatized. Some in the crowd called them the N-word. Some are injured. They're also scared because they saw a few of their white colleagues show sympathy with the mob.
And then now you expect me to go stand beside an officer not knowing whether or not he's one of the terrorists. And that's what we deem them to be.
Let's listen to her. She served. She did some of this work. And we saw what happened. Jessica Watkins, an Army veteran from Ohio and an avowed member of the far-right militia group Oath Keepers, was boasting about her role there on the 6th. According to federal court documents, she posted online, "We stormed the Capitol today, tear gassed the whole nine, pushed our way into the rotunda, made it into the Senate even." White supremacist boasting. A 43-year-old New Yorker seen smashing an exterior window at the Capitol took a, quote, victory smoke inside that building, the FBI notes. He self-identified, though, as a former Marine, as well as a member of the Proud Boys, or police officers from Rocky Mount, Virginia, who proudly posted this selfie from inside the Capitol. These are police officers documenting their own crimes on the day of the insurrection. We're showing it to you unedited because you should see the message they're giving everyone. This is an exhibit in court now. They're facing 5 federal counts. They have also now, since all that, been fired. This is a complex story, as I mentioned at the top. There are heroic Capitol Hill police officers as well, many that we saw. They protected lawmakers, they risked their lives, they faced down the racism and crimes and threats of the mob, which included, as I'm showing you, veterans and officers in its criminal ranks. I want to read to you on air something that was said. We don't have it on tape, so I can't play it for you, but it's important, so I'm going to read it. A black officer recounting to one writer covering this, quote, "I sat down with one of my buddies, another black guy, and tears just started streaming down my face. I said, 'Is this America? What the blank just happened? I'm so sick and tired of this blank.'" These Capitol riots put much on display. The disparity in the treatment of people who march into the Capitol to break the law and get through it all, partly by overwhelming police, but partly by the disparate treatment, which we've also been documenting, the treatment of white criminals. There's also new scrutiny here on the years that led up to this, on the obviously murderous threat of white supremacist terrorist violence, of white terrorists, not singling them out because they're white, but referring, as those FBI directors did, to the fact that they are white supremacists, so their terrorism is in service of white power. If this is hard to say and hard to watch and hard to talk about, that's part of the problem. We need to document it, face it, talk about it as a society to make sure that when the evidence warrants, we are prosecuting it.
It is Friday, the 19th of February of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, the Ted Cruz fiasco is still resonating. Noticed how that totally took all the air out of Rush Limbaugh dying? Well, Rush will get his due in time anyway, because that was Rush. So, I must confess, I had passed along a tweet to David today, attributed to Ted Cruz, and unfortunately it was a fake tweet. David, I think, recognized it. No, I don't know, this might not be real, but it's still funny. And it is. It's still funny. So I do apologize for not doing due diligence, but it was just too funny. Okay, so got that out of the way. I hate passing on that kind of stuff when it's not real, but it was still funny. Hey, we landed on Mars yesterday. And when I say we, I mean we. When I was a kid, I'm sure that a lot of us of a certain age felt the same way. Quite intrigued by the space industry. The whole thing. I got up to watch every single launch even for the shuttles. And they got to be pretty boring after a while. I mean, that's why they got shut down. That's why we shut down the space industry. Yeah, it's just so boring. TV's not following it. Why are we doing this? Because we want to expand our consciousness. Or maybe even find another place that we can live when, this is the best place to live for now. But we may go the way of Mars. Yeah, we might lose our protective layer of electromagnetism that keeps the sun particles from burning us to a crisp, evaporating all the water on Earth and making it go into space. Our whole atmosphere is just, stripped away because of, plasma. Superheated charged particles of plasma from the sun. And that could happen. When our core stops generating this electromagnetic field, we're in deep trouble. And I think, as a life form, we've experienced this a few times before. And the only way to survive it was the hope that some giant object flying at speed through space hit the object that you were living on, shattered it enough, and kept you inside somehow to survive, and then float around for however long until you landed on another planet and started all over again. What we're trying to do now is, build our own spaceships so that we don't have to rely on a meteorite or a meteor or a comet or an asteroid to break up the planet that we're on that's dead or dying. And hopefully that we can pan sperm somewhere else. Send us out there. We'll fall on something. So I actually, as a kid and even as an adult, thought that was a pretty good endeavor. I know it may be taking some money away from other programs that we need to address, but I think that we're still addressing those programs. Okay, so actually that was quite exciting. I live tweeted as we were about ready to touch down. Yeah, and that was quite exciting. And this rover has a helicopter. Looks more like a drone, but they're calling it a helicopter. And that is the first time that piece of machinery will be used on another planet. So that could be very exciting. Just because, it could be another tool in the toolbox. We are looking for signs of life, microbial life, maybe fossilized. What if it was still alive? And it could still be. We have some extremo species that exist now around lava vents and any other number of extreme environments. Look at the tardigrades. Wow, I wonder if we might find tardigrades there. Maybe they were the original Martians. I don't know. Or fossilized forms of them would still be quite interesting. But, there could be microscopic microbial life squirming around. And we're going to put them in flasks. And then on a later mission, we're going to pick those up and bring them back here. I don't know what could go wrong with that. They keep saying, oh, yeah, it's totally clean. Don't worry. We might have another organism from another planet. But we'll make sure it doesn't escape. Uh-huh. How many times have we heard that before in every science fiction movie we ever saw about, studying life forms from another planet? Next thing you know, they're like eating their way out of your stomach to live their lives. I don't want to have that happen. That could be bad. Okay, so much going on as usual. We tried to get rid of this guy Trump, but he's finding a way. He's finding a way to squirm his way right back into our consciousness, and I hate it. On the one hand, I could go without ever having to hear that guy's weird, bully voice, Mob Don voice. And then there's another part of me is that if we don't attend to this fellow, something like him and worse is going to rise up. And they're in the process of getting that right now. I love this. 4 times as many bills to suppress the vote are being lodged this cycle than were lodged for the last election to keep people from voting. And when I say people, I mean black people. And I don't know, fellow travelers, So 140 some odd bills, 4 times as many. The GQP hates America, hates Americans, and above all, hates democracy. They just want unbridled authoritarian power. Do we give it to them? No, I think they already have it. We have to wrest control of it from them. And how onerous is it? Now, I got to say I'm not a big fan of Cuomo. I kind of like him, I mean, he's okay, but still, not my cup of tea. Certain policy issues I could do without. But he's a Democratic governor, and that's a good thing. So it is curious to me how a federal investigation is going after Cuomo for, I don't know, fudging data or not fudging data or misreading data. Everybody knows that convalescent deaths have been undercounted. Everybody knows that across the nation. And it kind of happens on a much smaller level than the governor in many cases, except for the repugs. So they're going after Cuomo, but they're not going to go after Abbott or DeSantis or Nome or any of the repug governors across the nation who called the pandemic a hoax, open up the schools, infect people so we can have herd immunity, any number of their crazy ideas, but no one's going after them. Where is the federal investigation into DeSantis fudging data? How about this? Jailing scientists because their data didn't fit what he wanted. Where's the federal investigation for that? So this does not bode well because it means that there's some things from the Trump administration still embedded in the DOJ. I know. Cases are like a train. They're kind of hard to stop when they get momentum. But why is Cuomo being investigated? Why is that investigation like a train with momentum? You mean there was nothing ever initiated during the Trump administration about DeSantis, Nome, or Abbott, or any of the others? Only the Democratic one? Well, I guess I could put on my Casablanca hat and say I'm shocked. In fact, I just did. Oh, so, yeah, we have powers arrayed against us that are fairly well entrenched. And all that means is that in spite of the fact that there are 4 times as many bills being lodged to prevent people to vote for than the last time we voted, all it means, and we all know how we get around that, is that we just vote in even greater numbers so that their obstacles, their suppression, their cheating can't work because there's just too many of us voting. And they're going to try to get people off voting rolls, and we have to be aware of that. And we have to be on top of that. And we have to go to the midterms, and we have to vote like Republicans did from years past. They came out for the midterms. They got their crazies in with only a few voters voting. The general comes around, we win the presidency, but we can't govern because they have stacked the deck in the whole infrastructure of our government and politics. Time to make a change on that, and we're working on that. We did really well this last time. We did really well in the last midterms. We did really well in this general. We need to keep it up. We need to be like a train with a lot of momentum. We need to come out in even greater numbers. Wouldn't it be nice if we had even greater numbers than the general in the upcoming midterms? That would be something. Of course, the GQP would call it all fake. Russia did it. No. I just love how they always project. They always accuse others of what they are doing. Even Ted Cruz is an example of that. I mean, he's been out there any number of times complaining about Democratic politicians taking vacations during crises. And apparently this Jaunt to Cancun he got caught on wasn't the first time he hightailed it out of the United States, Texas in particular, when there was a crisis. Because that's Ted Cruz. He's a shit poster. He's not a politician. He is not a representative of us. When I say us, I mean, I know his constituency. There's enough of them there that vote him in. But he's not even representing them. And I actually think that maybe people are finally coming to that realization. Nobody likes Ted Cruz. Nobody. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, at the top, that was Ari, of course, breaking down how there's a direct link from the MAGA Capitol Riot on January 6th to white supremacy in U.S. policing. Which came first, chicken and egg story, huh? Well, I would argue that there has been a white supremacist element in the concept of policing from its very inception, considering that the U.S. policing industry began as being slave patrols, picking up slaves who have tried to be free. Even when they're free, they got picked up because, hey, they'll figure it out later. On the rest of the menu, price gouging for lodging and necessities has skyrocketed amid the Texas polar vortex. Hey, survival of the fittest, huh? A former Arizona GOP politician is contesting the first of 3 sentences for running an illegal adoption scheme prohibited by international compact. They talk about child abductions and child sex trafficking, and here's this guy, a GOP politician. They always are doing what they accuse others of doing. And Pan America has reached a settlement with the government over its suit against Trump that will protect journalists in the future. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where 2 journalists in Belarus were sentenced to 2 years in prison for filming a protest against authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko. And a Lebanese court dismissed a judge who had charged the nation's top politicians with negligence over last year's Beirut port explosion. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and she's doing a lot more. And thank you, Kelly, for doing everything that you do. Thank you. If you would then take a look to the left of the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then hopefully notice the link to our Patreon page. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could possibly send us the equivalent of what it might cost you to purchase an espresso-type coffee drink, and then send those funds our way, we stretch those dollars, we pay our bills, we fly under the radar, continue broadcasting as the founders originally intended, and thereby fulfill our civic duty, also as the founders originally intended, and we have your generosity to thank. And thank you to those who have been so generous. And we're going to give you, well, I guess a Minority Report pre-thanks for your generosity in the future. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, go to @NetrootsRadio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. And he does so much more, too. He's pretty busy, even in real life, especially in real life. Follow me on Twitter Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime and then get that linked up on social media. Twitter being one of those platforms, so go ahead, follow me there. You could also follow me on other social media platforms like that one that's decided that they're not going to do anything that comes into or out of Australia because they can. You could find me there in the show notes and links diary, but maybe not. No, you would. But find me on Twitter instead. Okay, for now. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, go to @CookbookWest. And do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Okay. Yeah, my snoozing sous chef has been a little quiet this morning. A little, but I expect him to start working hard at his job as the snoozing sous chef. He's really good at it, too. He works really hard for long periods of time, too. I don't know how he does it. Well, he's an English bulldog. That's part of it. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because we also have the chef's table, so save enough room for that, even though they're little amuse-bouche, little tiny kiss. It could be like in Monty Python or Terry Gilliam. That might just be the bit that puts you over the end, and then you make a mess in the dining hall. Sean Murphy of the Associated Press brings us this first offering. Hotel rooms for $1,000 a night. Gasoline prices spiking. Even bottled water prices doubling or tripling overnight. Well, it sounds like the magic of the market, doesn't it? Officials in Texas say the winter storm that knocked out power and water to millions of residents. It's not a winter storm so much as it is the polar vortex. It has a lot more import to call it the polar vortex than a mere winter storm. Jeez. But, oh well. That knocked out power and water to millions of residents is providing an opportunity for some unscrupulous merchants to take advantage of the situation by charging exorbitant prices for essential supplies. We call that gouging during a crisis. Profiteering. We used to think that was bad, but in the era of Trump, you're a loser if you don't try to take something from somebody. A system set up Wednesday in Houston for residents to report incidents of price gouging received more than 450 complaints in less than 20 hours. The main types of things we're seeing, said Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee, the chief civil attorney for Texas's largest city, is hotels setting prices at ridiculous rates. Do the hotels have a generator to generate power? Where are they getting their fuel for it? Makes you wonder, huh? We've seen allegations of packs of water being sold for 2 to 3 times the normal prices, or packs of water being divvied up and the individual bottles being sold at excessive prices. Deshaun Walker, age 33, searched for a hotel room Tuesday night to avoid the cold of his powerless Dallas apartment. After finding all the rooms in Dallas booked, he ended up driving to an extended stay hotel in the suburb of Louisville, only to pay $474 nights for a one-night stay. It's crazy, he said. I mean, why do y'all go up on the hotels in the middle of the crisis? Like, dude, come on now. Everyone is just trying to make it, and they're capitalizing off a crisis. And that's so unfair to people who really can't afford it. Well, in Texas, they keep telling you it's the survival of the fittest. And survival is not for little people, apparently. Such price hikes are illegal under Texas law, which prohibits selling fuel, food, medicine, lodging, building materials, or other necessities at an exorbitant or excessive price during a state or federal disaster declaration. The Texas Attorney General's office urged residents who suspect they are victims of price gouging to file a complaint with their office. Violators may be required to reimburse consumers and can face civil penalties of up to $10,000 per violation. Additional penalties of up to $250,000 can be imposed if the victims are elderly. Jacques Villieu of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A former Arizona politician who acknowledged running an illegal adoption scheme in 3 states that involved birth mothers from the Marshall Islands has asked an appeals court to throw out his 6-year prison sentence, arguing a judge double-counted factors in the case that increased the severity of his punishment, such as concluding that he abused his position as an adoption attorney. He is claiming he did not abuse his position as an adoption attorney while being an adoption attorney running an illegal adoption scam. Okay. Paul Peterson, a Republican, well, that explains it right there, who served as Maricopa County's assessor for 6 years and operated an adoption practice on the side, is contesting the first of 3 sentences he will receive for arranging adoptions that are prohibited by an international compact. A month ago, he started serving the sentence for a federal conviction in Arkansas for conspiring to smuggle humans. He is scheduled to be sentenced next month on convictions for fraud in Arizona and for human smuggling in Utah. In the Arkansas case, Peterson was given a prison term that was 2 years longer than sentencing recommendations had called for after a judge concluded Peterson had misled or instructed others to lie to courts in adoptions that wouldn't have been approved had the truth been told to them. In an appellate brief filed this last Tuesday, his attorney, Kurt Altman, said his client's sentencing range should have been between 3 and nearly 4 years in prison, arguing Peterson's actions weren't intended to do harm and that his punishment was more severe than those given to others convicted of the same crime. Well, he's an elected official, isn't he now? And I bet he was out there complaining with the QAnon meme that Democrats are trafficking in babies. You can rest assured that's exactly what this guy's been doing. Altman said the judge's comments show the district court held an inordinate amount of animus towards Mr. Peterson because of his position as a lawyer. Well, I think that's part of it. Charlie Robbins, a spokesman for the U.S. Attorney's Office in western Arkansas who prosecuted Peterson, declined to comment on the appeal. Altman also argued to the 8th Circuit that the $100,000 fine imposed against Peterson in Arkansas was unreasonable because the judge had questioned whether Peterson's divorce was a ruse aimed at hiding his assets and avoiding a fine. Well, the lawyer says there was no evidence to show that, except apparently there was plenty of evidence. Authorities say Peterson illegally paid women from the Pacific Island nation to come to the U.S. to give up their babies in at least 70 adoption cases in Arizona, Utah, and Arkansas. Marshall Island citizens have been prohibited from traveling to the U.S. for adoption purposes since 2003. Judge Timothy Brooks, who presided over the Arkansas case, had said at sentencing in December that Peterson turned what should be a joyous adoption occasions into a baby-selling enterprise and described Peterson's adoption practice as a criminal livelihood. Larry Neumeister of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. a literary group that sued then-President Donald Trump with claims that he repeatedly violated the First Amendment in his dealings with the media, announced a settlement with the government that it said will protect journalists in the future. PEN America, a human rights organization of writers, literary, and media professionals, said the deal leaves intact a judge's ruling upholding its standing to challenge Trump's threats and acts of retaliation against journalists and the media. The organization sued Trump in Manhattan federal court in 2018 on behalf of its 7,500 members, saying he is not free to use the power and authority of the U.S. government to punish and stifle the press. Government lawyers notified a judge of the settlement without elaborating on its terms. A spokesperson for government lawyers declined to comment. In October, Judge Lorna G. Schofield had allowed the government to appeal whether declaratory relief can be awarded against a sitting president in his official capacity for his discretionary conduct. Weeks later, Trump lost his quest for re-election to the current president, Joe Biden. Last March, Schofield had refused to dismiss the lawsuit, saying the nonprofit organization could sue over claims that Trump selectively barred access to the White House and threatened to revoke press credentials or security clearances of ex-government officials whose commentary he disliked. Suzanne Nozzle, PEN America's chief executive, said in a release that the lawsuit and settlement represents an important win for free speech, a free press, and the First Amendment. The evidence is clear. Not even the President of the United States can invoke the power of government to threaten members of the press based on our coverage, she said. While the President has First Amendment rights, he or she does not have the license to use the authority of the office to menace critical journalists or punish their coverage. Christy Parker, a former Justice Department lawyer who worked on the lawsuit, said Trump left behind a toxic anti-media streak in the U.S. Parker works at Protect Democracy, which opposes efforts to form a more authoritarian government in the U.S. PEN America noted in its release that its members include Jim Acosta, CNN's chief domestic correspondent, whose White House press credentials were temporarily revoked in November of 2018 by the Trump administration. Our First Amendment rights are always worth defending, Acosta said in the release, and it's in all of our interests as Americans that we maintain a strong and independent free press in the United States. In her March ruling, Schofield cited the action against Acosta as boosting the credibility of the group's claims, noting the organization alleged Trump punished Mr. Acosta publicly in order to chill his speech and the press corps. She noted Trump had made an example of Acosta by stripping his press credentials after he asked critical questions about the administration, barring him from White House press briefings, and directing his press secretary to warn other reporters they would face similar consequences. All right, that takes us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Unearthed. Recently, the online assets of the park at Britain's Sutton Hoo excavation site started receiving hits like never before. The reason? The release of the motion picture The Dig, which recounts how the archaeological site came into prominence just as the Second World War was commencing. At first glance, a story about digging in the dirt could summon up allusions to boredom, though we've had hero archaeologists before, Indiana Jones. Here, though, the story isn't interlaced with the supernatural to drive box office. Rather, it's an understated narrative of the uncovering of the most significant piece of Anglo-Saxon history, the burial ship Sutton Hoo. Our protagonist is the sharp but non-formally educated Basil Brown, played by Ralph Fiennes, who's hired by the estate's owner, Carey Mulligan's Edith Pretty, to investigate several large mounds on her property. The mounds are thought by academics to be of the relatively common Viking variety. Brown isn't so sure, though, and leaves a nearby dig of an old Roman villa to pursue the mounds more closely. And yeah, he pursues Edith some too, but in that suppressed Victorian way where things never really happen. Once the project's importance is recognized, a pompous character played by the wonderful Ken Stott shows up to take over, along with additional archaeologists and an additional romantic subplot. The story, from England's beginnings, unfolds as its future is in doubt. We see warplanes overhead. The dig is about juxtaposition, timelessness and urgency in plot and subplots, and about recognizing Basil Brown's part in the project. His name wasn't even mentioned by the British Museum in its initial artifact displays. Cinematic license is taken, to be sure, with respect to some characters, but this one stays close to the 06 book on which it's based and is a satisfying watch. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Jason Goldman. Morning in Tanzania. The sun rises over the Ngorongoro crater. The spotted hyenas are beginning their day, while Yves Davidian from Germany's Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research sits nearby in a truck, watching and waiting. The most exciting part of her day is when a male hyena crouches on his hind legs to poop.
So I did collect a lot of fecal samples, monitor a lot of behaviors, spend a lot of time following males on site in Tanzania in the field.
Biologists have been monitoring the 8 hyena clans of Tanzania's Ngorongoro crater for 25 years. They've learned a lot about the species, but there are still some outstanding mysteries.
Why is it that high-ranking individuals, and in particular high-ranking males, often are more successful than low-ranking males in terms of reproduction? In spotted hyenas, in contrast to many other mammals, males don't fight to access a high social rank, and they also don't fight to access breeding partners. And so it is quite puzzling why high-ranking males, if they don't fight and they are not necessarily more attractive to females, why they should be more successful than males of lower social rank.
In all, Davidian had nearly 400 fecal samples collected from 120 male hyenas. She analyzed the hormones inside of them and discovered that interactions among male hyenas were more stressful for lower-ranking males. And as a result, they spent more time alone. The results were published in the journal Functional Ecology.
And the consequence of that is that low-ranking males, they spend less time courting females and are therefore less successful in terms of the number of offspring they produce compared to high-ranking males who spend most of their time courting females.
All that time spent alone recovering from stress means that the lower-ranking hyenas aren't spending their time courting females. And the females that they do manage to spend time with are themselves also of lower rank. The researchers think it has to do with the fact that lower-ranking males tend to be newcomers within hyena clans. It takes time to develop their support networks among other males.
They do have to spend a lot of time building up and maintaining these relationships before they can even think about courting females.
So for male spotted hyenas, it might be that the best path towards romance is to begin with a bromance. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Jason Goldman.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
We can't just settle for disinfecting the White House after 4 years of Trump. A fundamental structural rebuild is necessary, including in healthcare, immigration, environment, civil justice, labor law, and infrastructure. But here's another huge area that must become a priority for a major policy overhaul: the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Quick, name the Ag Secretaries under Carter, Clinton, and Obama, representing 20 years that Democratic presidents had control of ag and rural policies. Few Americans can name even one because, well, what did they do? Even as crisis after crisis ripped through the farmlands and communities they were supposed to serve. Consider Barack Obama's former appointee, who Biden has chosen to serve again, Tom Vilsack. Bizarre, since he actually tried to resign as Obama's secretary, complaining, "There are days when I literally have nothing to do." Seriously? At that time, whole towns were boarding up, massive hog factories were exploiting farmers and local residents, climate change was advancing relentlessly, and, well, get to work. Vilsack did eventually find something to do. He became chief Washington lobbyist for dairy exporting corporations, drawing a $1 million annual paycheck. Meanwhile, hundreds of U.S. dairy farmers are going bankrupt today under low milk price policies he sanctioned. USDA, created in 1862 by Abe Lincoln to be what he called the People's Department, could again become a transformative force for the common good. But our recent presidents have used the position to keep the corporate giants of agribusiness content and in charge. Thus, USDA's top leadership has been indifferent and hostile to the majority of workaday rural people who need an ally. This is Jim Hightower saying, so let's become that ally. To help make USDA the People's Department again, go to rootsaction.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
Given that the text of the Constitution does not specifically grant Congress the power to investigate, where does Congress's power to investigate the insurrection of January 6th come from? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The Constitution lists the types of laws Congress can pass. For example, collect taxes, regulate commerce, establish post offices, and provide for a navy. Investigate the executive branch by creating a committee with the power to issue subpoenas, compel witnesses to appear, and produce documents. Well, that just isn't on the list. We need to go back almost 100 years to the 1920s and the Harding administration, when Congress wanted to investigate bribery at the Interior Department involving oil leases and a cover-up at the Department of Justice, what we know as the Teapot Dome scandal. One of the subpoenaed witnesses contested Congress's authority, and in 1927 the case went to the Supreme Court, which gave, and I quote, "the case earnest and prolonged consideration because the questions involved are of unusual importance and delicacy." The Supreme Court then held that although the power to investigate is not delineated in the Constitution, the power of inquiry is an essential and appropriate auxiliary to the legislative function, and so Congress has that power. Legislative oversight of the executive branch is indeed an essential pillar of democracy. Because the Supreme Court got this right almost 100 years ago, Congress can investigate the insurrection today. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day streetcar workers in Philadelphia walked off the job just as garment workers were ending their victorious strike. The walkout soon turned into a general strike. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electrical Railway Employees Local 477 had been trying to negotiate fewer hours, higher wages, and union recognition for almost a year. Philadelphia Rapid Transit broke off negotiations in mid-February, fired 173 union members, and imported scab replacements from New York City. The Amalgamated Association of Street and Electric Railway Employees called workers out. Strikers pulled apart buildings under construction and used the materials to block tracks and build strike shelters. Many trolley cars were badly damaged when the Philadelphia Rapid Transit attempted to resume service. Scab drivers fared as badly as the trains they attempted to run. The mayor called for citizens to serve police duty after strikers loaded dynamite onto tracks in Germantown. The union offered up its members to preserve order, but the mayor refused. Then, the Philadelphia Rapid Transit brought in an additional 600 scabs and National Guardsmen to protect them. Area workers were infuriated at this latest move, as were small businesses and religious groups. On March 5th, the Central Federated Union called a general strike. More than 75,000 workers stayed off the job to protest anti-worker assaults. Though the general strike was called off at the end of March, transit workers stayed out until April 19th. They won wage increases, rehiring of strikers, and mediation for the initial 173 fired workers. They could not secure exclusive union recognition, but the strike solidified solidarity among area workers and demonstrated the capacity of labor to organize work actions across industrial lines.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only about 45 or so. Showers currently occurring at this moment with overcast skies during the afternoon hours with a bit of more rain, expecting something less than a quarter of an inch, and then overnight lows in the mid-30s with occasional light rain tapering to a few showers late overnight. Winds light and variable. Winds today will be out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10. And then tomorrow, showers in the morning with some clearing in the afternoon, highs in the upper 40s. Winds will remain light and variable. We do have a forecast for snow in the middle to the late week coming up, so we'll be looking for that. Pollen is still rated at none outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is moderate at 68 parts per million. People are burning wood to keep warm, and that daytime UV index is moderate at 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.25 inches. Visibility is at 3 miles, and relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 51 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 57 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 57 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 15 degrees, and they say that's fair. Fair for them, maybe. Kabul is 50 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 58 and clear. Tokyo is 43 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 71 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 49 and cloudy. And New York is a freezing 30 degrees Fahrenheit with falling snow. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. This first amuse-bouche is brought to us by anonymous staff at the Associated Press. 2 journalists in Belarus were convicted yesterday, of violating public order and sentenced to 2 years in prison after they covered a protest against authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko. Katsuriana Bakavalava, 27, who also goes by the last name of Andreeva, and Daria Shusova, 23, both of the Polish-funded Belsat TV channel, were arrested in November after police broke down the door of a Minsk apartment where they were doing a live stream of a demonstration in the Belarusian capital. Addressing the court before the verdict, Bakavalava vowed to continue working for building a Belarus that won't have political repressions. I am not pleading, she said. I am demanding acquittal for me and my colleagues. And she was referring to the other jailed journalists, of course. The 2 were charged with organizing actions rudely violating public order, accusations they denied. The U.S. Embassy condemned the political convictions and egregious prison sentence for the journalists and urged authorities in Belarus to cease the persecution and prosecution of journalists and media outlets for covering the news. The U.S. reiterates that Belarusian authorities have a commitment to protect and uphold fundamental freedoms, especially those of assembly, speech, and the press, it said in a statement. More than 400 journalists have been detained in Belarus in the last 6 months, and at least 10 have faced criminal charges and remain in custody.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Ellen Francis brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Lebanese court on Thursday yesterday dismissed a judge who had charged top politicians with negligence over last year's Beirut port explosion, infuriating families of victims who said it showed that the state would never hold powerful men to account. Judge Fadi Sawan had led the investigation into one of the largest non-nuclear blasts in history. In December, he charged 3 ex-ministers and the outgoing prime minister with negligence. 200 people died in the August blast when a huge stockpile of ammonium nitrate that had been stored unsafely for years detonated at the capital's port. Thousands were injured and entire neighborhoods were destroyed. Families of the victims gathered at Beirut's Justice Palace on Thursday night to protest against Sawan's removal from the probe. Clad in black, they cradled photos of their dear loved ones and held picket signs that read, "Where are the investigation results?" One woman sat on the ground and wailed. The officials charged by Sawan had refused to be questioned as suspects, accusing him of overstepping his powers. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? So that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we're going to meet up on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.